Well, my name is Mackey. I was stationed at 92nd Bomb Group, 578 Squadron at Wendley, Norfolk, England.
And you've decided to write down pretty much every single thing you did while stationed over there in the form of this book, your story.
As much as I could from notes that I kept and from letters that I had written home that my mother kept until I returned home. And from a friend wrote a history of the 392nd Bomb Group, and there's material in there that I referred to in writing my story.
So, how long was the process of making this then?
How long is making this story?
Yeah.
Well, I started about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not certain exactly when. I finished it last year, 2000 and 2007. Finished it. But of course I didn't work on it continuously. Whenever the spirit moved, I'd write a chapter or two. Pretty much the way it went.
And what was it like revisiting that part of your life after such a long gap?
Well, because I had been back to England, I think 5 times to the old days, and it was, those were special times, but to sit down and write it down, there was really nothing special about it. It just, sort of a chore, but at the same time I enjoyed it. Recall the things I did in more depth in writing it down than I would if I was just a casual thing.
So you say it was mainly through the letters that you wrote to your mother?
Well, that was part of it. Yes, that was part of it. The letters I wrote home, of course, I would be writing as much as I could that the censors would allow. I would be writing about what I was doing. And so she kept the letters, and then when I started writing my story, I could look at the letter, and I could, when I was in Wendling, and it was in October, I written maybe 2 or 3 letters in October, I could look at those letters, and it would help bring my memory back, and I would also be relating things that I could write down. So those letters were a definite help.
What kind of things did you write about? Was it the people
that
you were meeting?
The people we were meeting, we were not, we could not write about, nor would I want to write to my home about some of the missions that we flew, because, they were worried about it. And plus it would not pass through the censorship. You were not to be telling where you flew missions and how many people got shot up and etc. You yourself got. I could write about going down to London, who I met down there, what I did, and the sights I saw. Buckingham Palace, St. Paul's Cathedral, the general area downtown, Piccadilly Circus. Though there were some things that went on at Piccadilly Circus that I didn't write too much about. You could write that thing. If I went out, I had a bicycle, of course. Everybody had a bicycle. Take a ride out in the countryside. I believe I mentioned that I came from a farm. I was in the farm that grew there, how the crops were, etc. That sort of thing. Those are the things I wrote about.
the farmers that you met in Norfolk then, how welcoming were they? Did you end up, for instance, going around their house?
No, I never did. I just ride along and see. I didn't go and try to make acquaintance. I should have. I suppose that they had their own problems and they wouldn't want to bother with talking to me. But of course, I was very much mistaken about that. Now that I have gotten to know the English people better, I know that they would welcome me wholeheartedly. I was shy and didn't make the contacts that I could have.
So, one thing that I've noticed from speaking to all of you veterans is the importance of family, and also while you're away writing back home. And how was that a way of feeling close?
Well,
to home and to yeah.
It's quite a change from being at home, helping your father on the farm, driving a tractor and teams of horses, and doing all the things you do around the farm. All of a sudden, you're wheeled off in a train to Texas. You're thrown into the Army routine, which is completely different than anything you've ever experienced. And then you go into an airplane. An airplane is nothing like a tractor. So, yeah, the complete thing was such a big experience that it was hard to cope with sometimes, just because it was so different. Apparently, we all learned, most of us at least, learned to cope and persevered on the flying missions over Germany, where we also learned to persevere.
It's quite interesting though, because you had the opportunity to not get drafted, didn't you?
Yes,
So you kind of you chose to go.
Well, I knew that it was when my brother graduated from high school and he was home to work full time with my father on the farm, that one of us would be drafted, unlikely of me because I was the older. If you're drafted, you really lose control where you might be sent. You might go find yourself in the Navy. You might find yourself in the Army, in the infantry, or in any of the ground services. You didn't know, were you? So after a short time at the university, which I didn't like too well, I did enlist and I applied and passed the exam for aviation cadets, which I completed.
What do you remember of the early days where you and you were making new friends and you were learning how to fly?
I don't quite understand your question.
What do you recall from the days of when you were in training?
What kind of thoughts? Well,
Was it exciting? Was it exciting? Or?
Well, of course it was exciting. And everybody wanted to succeed so badly. And when you're in the aviation cadets, there's one thing hanging over your head at all times. If you cannot perform up to standards, you will not complete the training. You'll be washed out, is the term they used. Washed out was that was a little bit worse than going to hell. So you wanted to learn to fly the airplane so badly that you did not want to do anything else, to do anything that would cause you to wash out.
And then once you because you're in the training process, you're moved from place to place and from place again.
Yeah.
So in a way, when you arrived in Norfolk, that was your new home, in a way. Was it?
It was, yes, I stayed in Norfolk at Windling and 392nd. Longer than I've stayed at any previous base. Because the aviation cadets, you step from one more complicated airplane to the next, to the next, to the next. And finally, I actually went to single engine school in the advanced stage of cadets, and I thought that I would have a good shot to go into fighter planes. Not so. The Army selects where they want you, or where the needs are. That's where you go. And I wound up as a co-pilot on the B-24 crew, which was a bit of a disappointment. That's not what I wanted. Though it turned out good for me in the end, because I loved to fly so much that I wanted to make a career of it. And I flying a 4-engine bomber, a complicated airplane. I would have a better shot at getting employment with an airline after the war. So, and that's what happened.
What is it that you love about flying then?
Well, it's a sense of freedom. And also you learn to be master of this complicated machine that can fly in the air like a bird, and you can look down at all those other subhuman beings down on the ground who do not know how to fly. You know what I mean?
I think so. Yeah.
All right. Yes. It's a great feeling. It's a great feeling, and well, I made a career of it, and the pay is good, and not difficult. Actually, you after you learn to fly an airplane, the work is not difficult.
But flying those missions was very difficult indeed, I guess.
Well,
by comparison.
Well, yes, indeed. There was a great deal of danger to your life in flying a combat mission. The airline flying there is as safe as you and I are sitting here on this couch. But, so it's a very different type of flying.
Can you remember then the first time you were taken off on your first mission?
Yes.
What was going through your mind? Were you excited? Were you nervous?
Well, yes, but apprehensive. The entire crew was. All new crews are. We all realized this is number one. We have to get through it before we can get to number two. And if we're lucky and all goes well, we will actually get to number 35, and then we will go home.
And how many missions did you complete there?
35. That was a tour of missions at that time, at that point in the war, from September to April of 1945. A tour of missions, 35. Earlier in the war, in the 8th Airborne, a tour of missions, 25. But those were the days when the Luftwaffe was very active and missions were more dangerous.
In those 35 missions, how many times did you feel that you weren't going to make it?
Well, we never got shot up badly on a mission. We were lucky. It seems that some crews would get shot up 2 or 3 badly on various missions. We never did on a mission. We would on some mission, we would come home and count the flak holes in the airplane. Many of most of them you couldn't even stick your finger in. One time we had a piece of flak, it must have been a large piece, it entered the leading section of the horizontal stabilizer and penetrated quite a distance into the stabilizer, and of course we didn't realize it until we got on the ground, but it had cut some spars in the interior of the stabilizer, and we could have, if it had penetrated more, we would have lost the right vertical stabilizer. But we didn't, so that was that. That was about as bad as we ever got started. We never had an engine shot down. We had one engine fail as we were on the way home. It just, the piston came through the top of the cylinder. Why, we don't know, because we didn't have full power on it. We were descending, as a matter of fact, and we were nearing the English Channel, almost home. So that was no problem. We had 2 runaway propellers on January 10th, 1945. Soon after the mission was formed up, that day, January 10th, was a very, very poor weather. I forget where the mission was. It's in the book here, if I could look it up. It's not important because we never got there. We didn't, the group did. When we got to briefing, we learned that our own airplane, this one, Windy City Bell, would not be available, that we would have to take the squadron spare airplane.
How did that feel?
Well, that's okay, nothing wrong with that. B-24 to B-24. But when we got out to the airplane, it was very cold. The weather was bad, and sleet, and freezing rain, and light snow all night. And the ground was slick, and you can't walk on it, you know. And the taxiways and runways were slippery. The airplane had not been run up by any of the mechanics or crew chiefs. No one had. We got there, we were completely cold, and no one had touched it. The engines are cold, the temperature probably around 25 degrees or thereabouts, and well, we had a devil of a time starting the engines, and we were by then a deputy lead crew. We were supposed to fly off the lead crew of the group, fly off the right wing of the lead airplane of the group. So if he ran into difficulty, we could slide over there and take his place. That was because we couldn't get the engine started. The rest of the group departed, and we were the last one to take off. We had to build a floor, but we finally get the airplane off the ground. The normal procedure, to get the group together is to climb above the clouds, circle on a radio station above the airport, and get formed into formation. We know that formation had already departed. When we got off, we climbed directly on the course that we knew where we could find the group, climbed through the clouds, and there they were, number 3 propeller guns away. We don't know why. But the revolution per minute, the RPMs, climbed from a normal 20 to 2300 RPM, whatever it was we were using at the time, to 3600 RPM. And that it was whistling out there, and so the procedure is to shut the engine down, you take the power off the engine, but it still keeps turning at the same speed because now the propeller becomes a windmill. You're dragging through the air and it still keeps turning. So you want to twist the blade in the bob up so that it's perpendicular to the line of flight, and then there's no resistance, plus the propeller will not turn. It's called feathering the prop, feather the propeller. Jack told me to feather the propeller, and so I push in the feathering. I pull off power on the throttle with the throttle, shut off the fuel with the idle cutoff lever, and push in the feathering button. The feathering button is a big round headed red, and it's also its own circuit breaker. If there's too much load on it, it'll pop right back out, which is what happened. You can hold it in so it won't pop out. And the flight engineer was sitting on the jump seat, as all the flight engineer should at that point in the flight. So he reaches up, hold the feathering button in. That starts the electric feathering pump to pump oil into the hub to twist the blade into a feathered position. That overloaded the circuit to the feathering pump, and another circuit breaker popped out to the pump. So he has one thumb on the feathering button and the other on the other circuit breaker, which is up right on the pedestal there, the pilot pedestal where all the controls are. And there's some danger in doing that because if you overload the circuits enough, you can start an electrical fire actually. So anyway, the propeller then did slowly come to the feathering position. By this time we are in the vicinity of Norwich, and we are on top of the clouds at 6,000 or 7,000 feet. I don't remember the exact altitude. Because we have an engine failure, there's no way that we can stay with the group, and we can't catch them. They had disappeared anyway by the time all this had gone by. And so we had no choice but to go back to base and hope the weather was good enough that we could land. But first, we've got these bombs aboard, and we don't want to take them back. We normally would not take bombs back to the back. There's some back to the base, excuse me, because there's some danger of a bomb breaking loose on landing and exploding actually. So we took them out over the North Sea and dumped them. Then we turned back toward base at Wendling and on a westward heading, and number 2 propeller decides it will follow number 3, and it went into the overspeed condition. Now that one, we grabbed a hold of it right away. We didn't, right away we got the feathering button in, and it feathered without great problem. Now we're down to 2 engines and full fuel tanks, and the B-24 will maintain altitude. We were losing probably 100, 200 feet a minute through that area. As we were proceeding westward, we didn't know exactly where we were, but we were roughly, we learned that we were almost due south of Norwich. Anyway, there was a hole in the cloud. And in the middle of that hole in the cloud down there was the most beautiful big airport that I have ever seen in my life. So we spiral, circle down through that hole, we'll land at the airport. Fine, no big deal. And so we're landing from the west to the east, it turns out. They're lined up with the runway. And descending, we have the landing gear down, the landing flaps down. And the windshields and the side windows all iced up. Almost instantaneously. Now this is not an unusual condition when you descend. These windshields are glass and the side windows also. About an inch and a half or 2 inches thick. I'm not exact. They're flat resistant. That's the purpose of the thick windshield. But if you're descending from relatively warm air into very cold air, which the air was that day because of the ice and snow condition on the ground, they will ice up. And we had experienced that before, letting down just coming home from a mission. So we knew what had happened, but there was nothing we could do about it because we were 300 or 400 feet off the ground. We were lined up with the runway. Now we don't know if we are or not. And we're descending. Our only hope was that we would land somewhere on the airfield. We didn't care about, by now, we don't care if we land on the runway or not. Something to smooth the airfield would be welcome. Now, I look out the window, the side window, beside me, and I see some guys running. Now they're not just out jogging for fun.